consciousness. It's weird, right? The weirdest thing about humanity is that none of us remember what it feels like to not have consciousness. For as long as you've had memories or any kind of sentience, you've had consciousness. Because in order to have memories and sentience, you need to have consciousness. Now, what that's referred to in terms of a psychological perspective is ego and superego, but we'll get into that. And humans are amongst the only animals in the entirety of the animal kingdom who have both ego and superego, while most animals are dictated by something known as id. See, id is the bestial voice in your head that tells you need to eat, you need to sleep, you need to propagate. Basically, in the triangle of needs, id is your bottom layer. Id keeps you alive, ego makes you human, and superego makes you a good human. To put it in simple terms, id tells you need to go to the supermarket to get food. Ego tells you can drive your car there, and superego tells you not to veer your car into traffic. And the majority of us have all three of those things. But one could imagine simply having id and then developing ego and superego would be incredibly jarring. And it kind of is, which is why it takes us years. But going from nothing to everything in the matter of a day or even a couple of hours would be terrifying. Immediately, you would go from a beast whose only directive is to eat and sleep and propagate to a human who has a quest for knowledge and answers. And that is currently exactly what's going on in Boruto. As with Chapter 4 of Two Blue Vortex, our new Akatsuki was revealed, and that new Akatsuki is 4 Shinju, or 4 walking divine trees. However, these walking divine trees are rather new to the idea of existence. See, because prior to these Shinju, as we're going to be calling them, existing, they were simply claw grimes, an extension of a juvenile Ten-Tails, running around trying to eat whatever they could in hopes that what they ate was an Otsutsuki. However, because of some tinkering by code, and because the claw grimes that they once were found something to eat, which was a human, the personality and chakra of the humans that they ate have imprinted upon the blank templates that were the claw grimes, creating the Shinju. And thus these beasts, solely controlled by id, have developed ego and superego. That is to say that these beasts have become man. But with the current main antagonists of Boruto's story just stumbling upon consciousness, their objectives are somewhat unclear to us common readers. And that's not our fault as readers. In fact, the Shinju's own objectives are somewhat of a mystery to themselves. See, because let's say hypothetically you were a deer walking around in the forest looking for berries and trying to not get shot in the heart by a hunter. And then one day you simply woke up and you knew what a W4 was. What's the first thing you would do? That's kind of the exact situation the Shinju are in, on top of also being insanely powerful, as only one of the Shinju, and probably the weakest of the Shinju, code, was able to pressure Boruto. However, this doesn't mean that the Shinju haven't began to work towards a goal, as the Shinju have already taken decisive steps to try to accomplish something. It's just we're not entirely sure what that something is, but we do know what the steps they've taken thus far are. And the most important of those steps was the stealing of the juvenile Ten-Tails. But why would 4 entities split off from this juvenile Ten-Tails, given consciousness, then decide that they need the Ten-Tails they were split off from? While understanding that one simple question could key us into what the future of Boruto's next arc is going to look like. Because once we begin to understand the Shinju, we can begin to understand what they're working towards. And once we begin to understand what they're working towards, we can begin to draw lines as to how they would get there, who it would affect, and how it's going to happen. And therefore, today, we're going to be answering that seemingly simple question. Why did the Shinju steal the Ten-Tails? It might seem like a non-consequential question, but the litany of possible answers that could be used to answer this possible question help key us into the litany of different directions the plot of Boruto could start heading. So with no further ado, let's get into what are the motivations of the Shinju. But before we get to talking motivations, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you want to understand my motivations, guys, you're gonna have to go ahead and follow my other YouTube channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime. And if you guys want to motivate me to be the greatest anime YouTuber on this platform, you're gonna have to go and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you want to motivate me even further, guys, go ahead and meander on over into my merch store, otakusanonymous.net, where you can pick up some of the greatest anime t-shirts, sweatshirts, and sticker packs known to man. Before we get into all that, guys, today we gotta talk about a brand new sponsor to the page, Rocket Money. You guys know me, I have to be as caught up with anime as physically possible. And with trying to be as caught up with anime as physically possible, that means I got subscribed to a lot of anime streaming services. Which means about a year ago, I subscribed to High Dive, and I haven't watched a show on High Dive in about a year. But thanks to Rocket Money helping me sort out my finances, I could realize that I was spending extra money every month on anime I wasn't even watching. See, Rocket Money is an all-in-one finance platform platform that helps you save more and spend less. And it helps you do that by managing things like your subscriptions, lowering your bills, helping you build a custom budget, and growing your savings, all in one neat little bundle of an app. See, me personally, I got some YouTube money that I need to manage, which is why I have Rocket Money help me lower my bills. All I have to do is take a photo of my bill, upload it to Rocket Money, and Rocket Money will help me negotiate with my providers to lower my bills. And that's any kind of bill, to internet service, to cable, to a phone bill. On top of that, I'd like to own a house one day, which is why I use Rocket Money to help build and monitor my credit. And Rocket Money really helps me with that, as they give me live alerts on my credit and give me active tips on how to improve my credit. But maybe most importantly for me, because I subscribe to everything and forget to unsubscribe from everything, I use Rocket Money to safely and securely identify my recurring payments. And any recurring subscriptions that I simply don't want anymore, I just tap and Rocket Money gets rid of them for me without me ever picking up the phone. So what are you guys waiting for? To save more and spend less, join the already 5 million users of Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/nchammer or go to the link in my description to get started for free today. You can also unlock even more features with premium. That's rocketmoney.com/nchammer23 or use the link in my description to get started for free. Think about it. Every dollar you save can be spent on anime figurines. So, the Shinju have stolen the juvenile Ten Tails. And for the life of me, I don't really know why. And it's not because I don't understand why they would do it. It's more about there's so many reasons they would do it. I'm not entirely sure which is the real one. See, Chapter 4 Boruto 2 Blue Vortex opens up with Boruto using Flying Raijin to get to the car dimension. Most specifically to get his hands on the juvenile Ten Tails before Code can make any more claw grimes, and to tell Code to destroy the claw grimes he's already created, as Boruto fully understands that the threat of the Shinju is on the horizon. However, before Boruto can even get eyes on the juvenile Ten Tails, it's been abducted. And abducted so fast that the chakra rods being used to pin it to the ground were still in the air. Now, these chakra rods were so powerful that the full-powered version of the juvenile Ten Tails wasn't able to escape the little dome they had it in, which means that whatever entity was able to rip the Ten Tails out from under these chakra rods was insanely powerful. Now, chakra rods, once they're impaled into you, disrupt your chakra flow. So going with the narrative that the bug Shinju is stronger than the Ten Tails is ridiculous. The Ten Tails was substantially weakened by the presence of these chakra rods and therefore couldn't break out from under them. However, since the bug Shinju wasn't affected by the chakra rods, it was able to rip the Ten Tails out. But still, that does speak to a pretty extraordinary level of power. But in the words of a super dead uncle, with great power comes great responsibility, especially if you just gained consciousness. But how does that responsibility bring the Shinju back to the Ten Tails? Well, fortunately, based off the small amount of information we currently know about the Shinju, we can take an educated guess as to why they would want the Ten Tails. See, Code establishes to Boruto as he's fleeing from the scene that he created that if one of these Shinju consume Boruto, they'll become a complete Shinju. Now, as somebody who was reading the leaks, that didn't really make a lot of sense. But now that the official translation is out, Code actually says if these Shinju eat you, they'll become a full divine tree and I won't have to do anything. And therefore, all the speculation that I made about this being the possible situation is immediately proven true by the official translation. It's the thing about reading leaks, you get it early, but boy oh boy are you lost 90% of the time. However, this 100% solidifies that the Shinju do still technically operate as claw grimes, even though they're a manifestation of the claw grime's ego based off the claw grime stealing ego and chakra from the person that they bit and turning into a tree, which means that the id side of the Shinju is still to eat any and everything, in hopes of one day consuming an Otsutsuki and turning into a divine tree. Now, a couple of days ago, I would have said the Kashin Koji telling Boruto when he returned to their hideout that if he was eaten, it would have ended the world instantaneously, proved that if the Shinju ate Boruto, it would create a divine tree, but official translation, baby. However, there's a problem with the Shinju developing an ego, and that problem is if your sole purpose in life is to bite something and for that something to turn you into a tree, you're not going to want to do that if you have consciousness. In fact, the ideology of this is eerily similar to that of a suicide bomber in real life. That is to say that your id tells you you need to survive, you need to eat, you need to drink, you need to sleep. And nothing in this brain of yours that ties into id ever tells you you need to die. The sole purpose of your id is to keep you alive. However, your ego and your superego have the ability to override your id. And in circumstances like religious fanaticism, your ego and superego can override that urge to survive in order to accomplish something in the afterlife or achieve a higher power, and thus the id is sold for a promise of something higher. Now, very few people are ever able to make this decision because it's idiotic. Breaking news is on the front page of the New York Herald. YouTuber says people who kill themselves over religion are stupid. But this is exactly the argument going on inside of the heads of the Shinju. Because a Claw Grime's prime directive is essentially self-destruction. See, a Claw Grime in the worst case scenario will bite somebody who's not Otsutsuki. And now instead of running around as a beast, they're a tree. Now technically, after Code's tinkering with the Claw Grimes, they also have the ability to manifest a Shinju, which is their ego. But we're not talking about that right now. But in the technical best case scenario, instead of eating a random person, they'll consume an Otsutsuki. And thus that Claw Grime, as a split off part of the Ten Tails, will be able to turn into a Divine Tree. However, regardless of failed Divine Tree or regular Divine Tree, in both of these circumstances, the thing that was once running around is no longer doing that forever. And in that sense, while they're not technically dead because they're living on as a tree or a Divine Tree, they're not running around anymore, and I bet the majority of you would rather be a fox than a tree. But when you sprinkle some consciousness into that equation, it's not that great of a deal, because now you're not running around only listening to your id. Now you're running around and you're thinking, oh, if I bite anything, I turn into a tree. Best case scenario, I turn into a tree that eats this entire planet. I grow a fruit that somebody else eats, and then I die. Worst case scenario, I hold on to a dude for eternity. And therefore, this is why in chapter 4, after the Shinju corner Boruto, the Mohawk Shinju, who may or may not be Jigen or Soegi, says after Boruto escapes using Flying Raijin, that Boruto was lucky, that currently the overwhelming curiosity and need for information flooding into the heads of all of the Shinju was outweighing their want to eat him. That is to say that the Mohawk Shinju said that Boruto was lucky, that their consciousness was outweighing their id. Because if they were still bestial Claw Grimes, hell-bent on eating anything, they would have eaten him and turned into a Divine Tree. However, what the Mohawk Shinju is kind of showing us here is that if Boruto hadn't escaped, none of them would have eaten him, because none of the Shinju wanted to turn into a Divine Tree. They want to remain alive, and turning into the Divine Tree is a kind of death. And this is actually corroborated by the fact that they're called Shinju in the first place, because Shinju in Japanese refers to two or more people ending their lives simultaneously. And there's a possibility that if one of these Shinjus, who operates as an extension of ego for a Claw Grime that bit somebody, were to actually consume an Otsutsuki and turn into a Divine Tree, that it would symbolize the end of their lives and probably kill who's ever sitting around in their failed Divine Tree, resulting in two people dying simultaneously for the same cause. Now, the official translation calls them Divine Trees and not Shinju, but in Japanese it is Shinju. It's just the official translation decided to call them Divine Trees. But this moral argument that all of these Shinjus are having revolving around whether or not they should eat Otsutsukis actually keys us into the possible reason why they would steal the Ten Tails. Well, actually, two possible reasons as to why they would steal the Ten Tails. The first of those two possible reasons is so that they can make more Claw Grimes. See, the reason that Boruto wants Code to destroy the Claw Grimes before they create Shinju is because Boruto seems to understand that the Shinju are not loyal to Code, and that was made overwhelmingly clear when the four Shinju arrived and not only tried to kill Code, but also verbally berated him, as the female Shinju, who may or may not be Moegi, laughed at Code and said that his fate will always be used as somebody else's clown. So now these entities that were once Claw Grimes that Code controlled are now not only stronger, but also have a consciousness that tells them that Code's not in charge. Thus, Code, through the medium of the Claw Grimes that he tinkered with, has unleashed a plague upon the earth that he cannot control, and that is probably more powerful than him. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the army of Claw Grimes that Code originally created aren't still under his control. They probably are, and therefore if these four Shinju wanted to make their own army, they would need the Ten Tails. However, the Ten Tails is already in an emaciated state, and it's hard for me to believe that Code would make his army as big as possible in the 3 years that he had. And therefore, the idea of these four Shinju making more Claw Grimes so that they can have an army, and so these Claw Grimes are the people who either eat Boruto or Kawaki one day and turn into a Divine Tree so they can hold on to their ego, it's not the greatest possible theory. Tie that into the fact that sure, while technically the Claw Grimes that Code has already created still listen to Code, if those Claw Grimes bite anybody, those Claw Grimes create more Shinju, who would probably align themselves with the currently amassing army of Shinju. And this is the real horrifying future that Boruto sees, as one of the Shinju created from a dude named Bug was strong enough to pressure Boruto, and therefore any more than 4 of them would be a global threat. However, the problem with the Shinju army growing with more Shinju as opposed to more Claw Grimes is that all of the Shinju added into the Shinju army have consciousness, and therefore none of those Shinju would want to eat Boruto or Kawaki because that would mean the loss of their consciousness. I mean, the only reason that lower ranking Otsutsukis give themselves up to be eaten by the Ten Tails is because they have karma markings, and karmic rebirth is implied to make Otsutsuki stronger. However, there's no promise of karmic rebirth to the Shinju. To be turned into a Divine Tree is simply to die, and therefore no matter how large the Shinju army may get, no Shinju would freely give themselves up to die. Which brings us to the second possibility. See, sure, the Ten Tails may already be too emaciated to make more claw grimes. Not the craziest idea of all time. We already established that Code had 3 years to build an army, and he's not the kind of guy to go into a battle without as many weapons as possible. However, this doesn't mean that the Ten Tails can't be used in a useful way. Because, well, sure, you can't split any more meat off the emaciated Ten Tails, the Ten Tails could still absolutely serve its key purpose, and that is to turn into a divine tree. See, something that's been lost in the shuffle of the fact that all the claw grimes and Shinju also have the ability to turn into divine trees is the fact that the Ten Tails' sole purpose is to do exactly that. And not only do exactly that, but also do exactly that probably much stronger than any claw grime or Shinju is capable of doing. See, because here's the thing about making a chakra fruit. We've already established that if the sacrifice to a Ten Tails isn't all that strong, the chakra fruit that it makes is proportionately weak. So if you had a lower ranking Otsutsuki that was 100 strength and you fed it to a Ten Tails, you would get a 100 strength chakra fruit. However, if you had a 50 strength lower ranking Otsutsuki, you would get a 50 strength chakra fruit. Thus, having a strong, full-blooded lower-ranking Otsutsuki to feed to a Ten Tails is very important for the higher-ranking Otsutsuki. Why would the same thing not apply to the Ten Tails? If the food matters, why doesn't the chef? And thus it's not crazy to assume that 1/1000th of a juvenile Ten Tail biting Boruto or Kawaki and making a divine tree would be weaker than if a full-fledged Ten Tails turned into a divine tree. And thus it's probably not to anybody's advantage that a claw grime or a Shinju are the ones who turn into a divine tree. And instead, it's much more to the advantage of whoever wants to consume the chakra fruit that the Ten Tails turns into the divine tree like it was supposed to. And this could be why the Shinju decided to steal the Ten Tails, as the Shinju fully understand that they themselves are strong enough to capture somebody like Kawaki or Boruto, but don't want to be the ones to give up their consciousness to turn into a chakra fruit. And thus, by obtaining the Ten Tails from Code, who they actively do not want to work with, they now have given themselves the means to create a powerful chakra fruit. And thus, by capturing Code or Kawaki or Boruto and feeding them to the Ten Tails, they would be able to create a chakra fruit that they could eat and possibly gain an Otsutsuki level of power, possibly granting them the ability to do things like karmic rebirth. And thus it would be important to the Shinju to not only reach this level of power, but also eliminate any and all possibility of them being used to make a divine tree. Because, and stick with me here, the only people and or things that would survive the infinite Tsukiyomi chakra destroying divine tree chakra fruit eating session would be the Ten Tail split-offs living on Earth, as they more likely than not wouldn't be affected by infinite Tsukiyomi. And thus the Shinju, if they were successful in this endeavor, could live on as technical extensions of a Ten Tails that they sacrificed to make a divine tree. And thus these Shinju could live on and harbor the hatred that they felt towards Otsutsuki kind, as they are technical extensions of a Ten Tails that has been living inside of a dome for 2,000 years, nailed to the floor. And the only interaction they had with the outside world is when Jigen needed to suck chakra out of it. And thus the Shinju would be identifying themselves as a third possible party in the Boruto grand power scheme. Not the Otsutsukis, not humans, but the living will of the Ten Tails itself, which would be a very interesting subplot line. However, there's a third possible answer as to why the Shinju would steal the Ten Tails, and it has nothing to do with the divine tree. At least, not yet, because there's also the possibility that Ten Tails wasn't stolen to be either turned into a divine tree or turned into things that could turn into a divine tree. There's a possibility that the Ten Tails was stolen to be turned into a leader. Let's think for a second on what these Shinju are. They're all technically kind of the children of the Ten Tails. They're all small parts of the Ten Tails carved off by Code, and therefore the Ten Tails, in a sense, is their creator. It would make logical sense that the Shinju, who are created through the suffering of the Ten Tails, would want to save the Ten Tails. But if they've saved the Ten Tails to turn it into a leader, where is it? Well, that might come in the answer of a man with a mohawk. See, the presumed person that I guess stole the Ten Tails would be the Bug Shinju, as soon as it's identified that the Ten Tails is gone, the Bug Shinju is seen. And the Bug Shinju is definitely strong enough to yank up those chakra rods and move the Ten Tails, especially in its emaciated form. On top of this, we saw in chapter 3 that Code had also made alterations to the Ten Tails, similar to the alterations he had made to the claw grimes. That is to say that the Ten Tails was covered in his claw markings. While we don't technically know whether or not he made the same alterations to the Ten Tails that he did to the claw grimes, it's not crazy for us to assume that. And thus there's a distinct possibility that after being freed from said chakra rods, the Ten Tails was able to undergo a transformation similar to what created the Shinju. However, the real question is, where does he get the chakra to undergo said transformation? Because in order to create the Shinju in the first place, a claw grime has to bite somebody and steal their personality, chakra, ninjutsu, all that. That answer lies with Jigen, as this theory states that because Jigen used the Ten Tails as essentially a chakra battery for almost 2,000 years in order to stabilize himself as an unstable vessel, that his chakra imprinted onto the Ten Tails, and therefore, when the Ten Tails was released, it underwent the Shinju transformation and made the Mohawk Shinju. Which, one, explains why the Mohawk Shinju appears to be in charge, two, explains why the Mohawk Shinju was talking about how the chakra fruit takes all of the chakra of those who are currently living and dead, and three, is a whole lot better explanation than the possibility of the Mohawk Shinju being Soegi, and thus possibly the real reason that Shinju decided to steal a Ten Tails was, one, to save their creator, and two, to make their creator their leader. And maybe because the only thing that was stopping the Ten Tails from undergoing this transformation into this Jigen-like Shinju, once the chakra rods were pulled out of the Ten Tails, it underwent that transformation automatically. And thus it's entirely possible that the Shinju weren't actually even trying to make a leader, and this Mohawk Shinju being created was simply a byfactor of them saving the Ten Tails. We just can't say for certain. We'll probably know in about another 26 or so days, but until then, what do you guys think? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Okay, here's my question. Would it be Jigen, or would it be Shiki? Or would it be a combination of both of them? Like, do your chakras meld? And if therefore your chakras meld, if you imprint your melded chakra onto some blank tablet that eventually becomes a Shinju, who gets the bigger personality slice here? Like, obviously, Jigen was a monk before Shiki floated into his brain. Was he a chill guy before that, or was he always Jigen-like? I have a lot of questions.